Hey guys, I hope you're having a wonderful night. I'm going to read two stories to you. One of them is called The Chieftains Curse. The other one is called The Woman in White, or The Girl in White, I should say. Okay, so this one, The Chieftains Curse, it states, the haunted house of legend must be a stately old mansion, perched atop a wind-swept knoll. One enters the grounds through a gate attached by a single hinge to the decrepit fence winding around the property. The building is in a desperate state of disrepair, planks missing from the front veranda, windows boarded up or broken, and, for good measure, a few bats ought to flutter from one of the gable windows. Of course, one visits the mansion at midnight when it's cold and windy, and terrors seem to wait just beyond that large, forbidding door. Well, that's fiction. In fact, one of Wisconsin's most famous haunted houses fits only part of that imaginary picture. In earlier days, this house and the land upon which it still stands seemed to be cursed with evil. No fewer than 10 people associated with the mansion met unusual deaths. Although there have been no reports of rattling chains or ghostly apparitions, if a house can be haunted with grief and sorrow, it is the Scott Mansion in Merrill. In the early part of the last century, an Indian village occupied the west bank of the Wisconsin River, which is now the city of Merrill. French fur traders had often stopped at the village to barter for goods. The peaceful Indians had little fear of the white men. When lumbermen began traveling the river during the big timber drives in northern Wisconsin, they were welcomed as brothers by the inhabitants. The village chief would bring the visitors to his wigwam, where they would be served meals by his only daughter. The men were entranced by the beautiful, shy maiden who soon became known as Jenny to her white guests. But the blissful life of the settlement soon turned to tragedy. A young lumberjack who was particularly fond of Jenny made love to her. The accounts differ as to what happened next. One version asserts that Jenny, ashamed of her act, killed herself. Another tale states that Jenny simply died soon thereafter, probably of the flu, which had been introduced among the Indian peoples by the white men. Whatever the cause of lovely Jenny's death, her father was grief-stricken. He ordered that she be buried upon a high hill across the river from the settlement. At her burial, the old man stood at his daughter's grave, gazed out over the river, and prayed, "O great Father, grant me this place for my child. Let this ground be sacred to her memory." Then he placed a curse upon that earth. Let it never do any white man any good. The years passed, the Indians abandoned the settlement, and Jenny and her final resting place were all but forgotten. The village that had grown beside the Indian camp was named to honor S.S. Merrill, the manager of the St. Paul Railroad. But in 1884, there began a series of events so strange that the old chief's grim incantations seemed to echo down through the ages. T.B. Scott, a wealthy Merrill mill owner and lumberman, purchased Jenny's Hill from the government and there planned to build a mansion fit for a timber baron. He knew nothing of Jenny or the curse. Only 2 years after he bought the land in 1886, Scott died with the house only partially built. He was 57. Scott's widow, Anne, in ill health, tried to complete construction of the mansion, but within a year, Anne was dead. It was now left to their son Walter to finish his father's work. Although his mother had urged him to complete the house, Walter apparently abandoned the project. Some years later, however, Walter did visit Chicago to consult an architect. During their meeting, Walter said the architect, a Mr. Sheldon, got into a fight and young Scott was stabbed to death with a letter opener. Sheldon proved self-defense, implying that Walter Scott instigated the struggle. The Scott estate sold the mill, uncompleted, mansion to Chicago millionaire Mr. I'm not sure how to pronounce this man's name. Mr. Chuckle, I think. He wanted the house as a summer retreat and made plans to install lavish additions to the mansion. Chuckle visited the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893 and bought a number of decorations for the house, including heavy hand-carved doors, plate glass windows, embossed mirrors, and a carved mantel. He hired workmen to install the furnishings and complete the construction. Cackle apparently spent little, if any, time in the mansion. Within a short time, a series of bad investments forced him to mortgage the house to a Chicago tavern owner named Barsanti. Chuckle was able to avoid foreclosure on the mansion when he inherited a large sum of money. Determined to recoup his losses, Chuckle invested the fortune in a contract to build a section of the Northern Pacific Railroad. The man knew nothing of railroads or engineering, soon went bankrupt, and later died in a mental institution. Bersanti took possession but never lived to see the mansion. He had apparently antagonized a murderous gang known as the Black Hand, and as he waited in Chicago's Union Station to board a train for Merrill, he was stabbed to death by one of the hands. The Bersanti family, in turn, sold the still vacant and only half-completed mansion to a real estate speculator, George Gibson. His idea was to build a home for elderly lawyers. An office was organized in Merrill to collect donations, and work once again resumed on the mansion. Late one afternoon, Gibson left his office for home and supper, then he vanished. Search parties were organized to scour the countryside. The Wisconsin River was dragged without success. River banks and booms, sections of the river where freshly cut timber jam up, were carefully watched. There was no apparent motive for Gibson's sudden disappearance. He was a devoted family man, well liked by the townspeople, with no financial problems. Indeed, he had looked forward to the day when the mansion would house the aged barristers, but George Gibson was never seen alive or dead after that day. The mansion reverted to the Bersanti family, since all payments on the house had not been made. The family retained possession for several years, during which the mansion was never occupied. A reputation of evil was now firmly attached to the old place. Caretakers looked after the house and grounds, mainly to protect it from vandals. One old groundsman was an Englishman called Popcorn Dan, since he also operated a popcorn stand in Merrill. In 1911, he sailed for England and a visit to his childhood home. Returning to America in 1912, however, he made a fatal mistake. Popcorn Dan booked passage on the SS Titanic. Wow, that's a lot of mishaps. Wow. The Lloydson family became the mansion's caretakers after Popcorn Dan's death. Mr. Lloydon died of alcoholism. Finally, Mrs. Mary Fellaber, a Merrill area midwife, bought the mansion for a small sum and took in boarders. One day, while out riding, she became ill, made her way to the nearby farm home, but died before a doctor could reach her side. In 1919, Herman Fellaber, Mary's husband, gave the house and adjoining property to the city of Merrill. 4 years later, the city gave the property to the Sisters of Mercy of the Holy Cross, an order of Roman Catholic nuns. The Scott Mansion is now used in a residence for the sisters. Who operate a hospital and small college nearby. Nothing particularly has happened to the house or its occupants since 1923. It is only a macabre coincidence that so many people associated with the house met with tragedy during their lives, or did that curse pronounced so very long ago carry through the decades to torment those who tried to build on Jenny's Hill. Perhaps now that the mansion and the grounds are being used for humanitarian purposes, there is peace on that high knoll. Should you ever see the Scott Mansion at the south end of Merrill, think of Jenny. Is the curse over? Yeah, at least for now. All right, this next one here. Sorry, I bit my tongue again. I have TMJ, so I'm constantly grinding, and I'm constantly biting the same spot on my tongue. So I keep fudging up my words. It hurts. Okay, this one's called The Girl in White. In the early days of the 20th century, few persons in rural Wisconsin traveled by car or even buggy. Those who owned horses rode them. Those less fortunate walked. John Grote was among the latter. One hot summer evening, he and his friend Ed, who also lived in the vicinity of Menomonee, walked a mile and a half to town. On the way back, they decided to visit their girlfriends, Carrie and Anna. The girls were sisters and lived with their parents in a farmhouse not far from the road and a small stream. As the men reached the wooden bridge that carried the highway over the shallow stream, they stopped briefly to reconsider their plans. Was it too late to visit the girls? After all, they weren't expected. Before they could decide, Ed shouted, "Look, John, there's a girl in all white coming down the road." She came directly toward them, but turned at the bridge, walked down into the stream, and vanished. Was it Carrie? Anna? How could anyone disappear in such a shallow body of water? Was there a deep hole someplace? After John and Ed recovered from their astonishment, they dashed to the spot where they had last seen the girl. They entered the water, walked back and forth, around and around, but could find no hole nor any trace of the girl. Where had she gone? Why, in fact, had she not crossed the bridge? Had the men's presence perhaps frightened her? Knowing that the occurrence must be reported, John insisted that they stop at the farmhouse, which was only about 80 feet from the part of the stream. He feared that the girl in white must have been either Carrie or Anna, and he knew, without asking, that Ed shared that fear. At the farmhouse, the girls' parents were still out on the porch. The mother explained that they had had company earlier and that the girls were now in the kitchen, washing dishes. Carrie and Anna soon came out and listened to their boyfriend's story. Both girls said they had waded the streams many times and that there was no deep holes anywhere in it. Who or what had the men seen? No one knows. But afterward, John always said that he would never have told the story if Ed had not been with him to witness a summer night's walk of the mysterious girl in white.